Good morning. Hey, Josh, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfect. Well, thank you, first of all, for doing this. You know, you've got some other folks in here. These guys are all muted, and so they may have some questions for you in the chat that I may relay. But other than that, you don't have a discussion. So we've also got this streaming on YouTube for a little bit anyway, for the first 15 minutes or so, just so you're aware of who you may be talking to. Josh, first of all, again, thank you for doing this. You know, obviously someone brought you to my attention when you made a video about eating a carnivorous diet. I thought that was kind of interesting. And then I was kind of binge watching all your TikTok stuff, and you've got a lot of just, I guess I'd call it advice. I mean, I guess that's kind of what you're just kind of putting out different thoughts and different strategies and relating different stories, which is very fascinating. So I wanted to just kind of ask you a little bit about your background. Where are you located? And tell us just a little bit about yourself, if you don't mind.
Thank you for having me on. I am an artist. I'm a musician. I'm interested in a lot of fields, but that's my identity pretty much. That's where I come from in my mind. I come from Austin, Texas, geographically. I grew up in the St. Pete Tampa area of Florida, went to college in Miami, and then moved to Austin. And I've been here for about 9 years now.
Yeah, I went to college, University of Texas in Austin, so I'm very familiar with Austin, Texas. Great town, and I always enjoy when I get to go there. And it's become a bit of a financial, mecca and hub and innovation hub. And you know, I think that's something that I think Miami has done that as well, as more and more people are fleeing different parts of the country and coming to these different states. And so, so as a musician, what kind of music do you primarily do?
Well, none anymore. At the moment, I am focusing on the creation that's happening on TikTok, and I've been doing a lot of writing. I've written the first draft of a book. I've been getting into podcasting. I'm really excited about that. So I grew up studying art and music. Those were kind of the primary things of my multi-interested brain. And I studied music in college. When I got out of college, I found myself getting just, a regular out of college job, just standard manual labor. And I did that for a while and eventually switched to teaching music. And I became a music teacher. I was a music teacher for about 8 years and until quite recently, actually. And during that time, I got really fascinated with learning theory. That became kind of one of my primary interests. Um, I went to college pretty early. I was like 15 when I started, so how to figure out stuff was kind of always on my mind. How to, absorb information was always of interest to me. And I got very fascinated by the subject of learning theory. And when you teach, you're hearing music all day long if you're teaching music. And you've got kids running around, and I'm an introvert. So the last thing you want to do when you get in your car is listen to more music. You want to break. At least I do. So I found myself listening to podcasts every single car ride, and it was usually, a 30 to 40-minute commute wherever I was teaching. And so that was sort of became my secondary education. And I just started absorbing information about a bunch of different fields during that time. Tim Ferriss was, I think, my favorite podcast at the time. And I mean, I'm sure he's super multidisciplinary. So it sort of fed my open personality. And along all of those things of like pursuing my curiosity, I developed the information. But life wasn't going that well. So I went till probably, I think it was like 3.5, 4 years ago, probably life was at its worst. And then I started applying all of those things that I've learned. And the things that you see on TikTok are just conclusions based on my life experience of, being a child and doing the whole adult thing and figuring it out.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about it because you like you said, you're providing advice for, I guess, other, maybe a lot of it seems to be targeted at maybe younger people that you've just kind of went through that experience, and I wondered how much of that you'd actually had personal experience. And I know, I mean, one of the topics you talk about is wealth creation or maintenance, and I know you've been fairly bullish on Bitcoin, which I've had a lot of. I've got some as well, and I think there's some value in that. There's a lot of people obviously that think it's kind of crazy and that type of stuff, but I mean there's certain things. So let's talk a little bit about the financial stuff. I think that's an interesting topic. I mean, you talk about how wealthy people maintain their wealth, by leveraging assets rather than spending and that sort of stuff. So talk a little bit about that strategy for those people that may not be familiar with that, and then I'd like to hear your thoughts a little bit more on the cryptocurrency in general. And I know there's people that are the Bitcoin maximalists, and they think everything else is garbage. And some people think, Doge or whatever, the flavor of the week type of stuff. So what are your thoughts around wealth and that sort of thing for long term?
Yes, I'd love to talk about it. So, to give you a little bit of background, um, a music teaching income is not a very high income, at least for a lot of folks that are doing it. And that was my income for years. And I did not like it. I definitely did not want to be in the position that I was in financially. I wanted to make more money, and I was always kind of chasing it in different ways. And when I hit that low point in my life around 3 years ago, what I ended up starting to do was I started to stop chasing big dreams, basically, and I started going, okay, what are the most practical, most safe, standard things? And that was when I started like really getting my financial education together, or connecting the dots from the separate things that I'd learned. And those were, the basic standard advice that, any solid person is going to give you, which is, get an emergency fund, get a retirement account, and things like that. And the first thing I bring up whenever anybody asks about cryptocurrency and building wealth and building, just their financial ability, I always recommend those things first, because a lot of us love to skip them. We want to skip them for the more exciting stuff. In the cryptocurrency space, there's some things that could 100x, which means, you invest $1,000 and you 100x it, you have a lot more money. And that's very exciting. But a very important point that I always try to bring up is our decisions are not based on logic. They're not based on what we know to be true. They're generally based on hope and fear. And if you haven't taken care of your basic financial health, your mind is literally a different mind than it needs to be to make the right decisions. Your mind changes based on your situation. It's contextual. So I really always recommend taking care of those simple things: emergency funds, basic contribution to a Roth IRA, into something that is secure and steady. Um, and then once you've done that, now you're not afraid that you're going to eat dog food when you're 65, because that's a legitimate fear, right? So that was sort of the context that I came from, that gave me sort of, I guess, the guts to start exploring crypto and start exploring equities and things like that. So yeah, just quickly about crypto. I think it's going to change the world. I think it's a big deal. Everything I can see of the smartest people that I look for, they're all invested way more than you would think in the space. And what I mean by that is a lot of investors that have spent their lives investing in, say, the equity markets, or doing venture capital investing. A lot of those people are now 100% in the crypto space. I've seen announcements of people committing to, yes, this is where I'm going to spend the rest of my life. And for really smart people to make that extreme of a change is a big deal. So just that one thing I think is worth noting. But also the utility that comes from cryptocurrency in general is basically more certainty. And so far as I can tell from the artist side, more certainty allows more creativity. So, an example of this is if you don't have a canvas, you can't paint whatever you want because your painting has to be decided by what you're painting on. If you decide to paint on a canvas, you can paint whatever you want because it's fixed. The stability of a square box allows you to put whatever creativity you want inside of that square box. Does that make any sense? The way I said that?
Yeah, it makes sense to me. You know, and like I said, I've seen, um, when we talk about asset classes, you talk about people owning property and companies, and they basically can borrow against that below inflation rates, and basically make money on that by borrowing money actually makes them make money, which I think is very fascinating sort of thing. And not many of us have that ability, not to that degree anyway, because you have to have a $500 million or something like that, or $100 million or something to leverage that to that level. But the
Yes.
I wanted to comment. I'll just segue into this because we have a group of people that want to talk about meat a little bit. But you mentioned not wanting to eat dog food when you're 65. I mean, my dogs eat ground beef, so if I have to eat ground beef when I'm 65, I'll be okay. But let me just and I
Respect.
want to continue. I want to continue along some of these other topics, but just tell me about your segue, your transition into a carnivorous diet. What got you interested in that, and why did you do that? And how's it working for you? And talk a little bit about your dietary preference currently.
Yeah, so I grew up like I want to be clear, like I was grown up like uh being told to be diet conscious, right? Like from a very young age, diet was talked about in our family as something to think about. So I didn't like have a random discovery late in life. I was pursuing this for a long time, but at the same time, it took me about like 13, 14 years to find something that worked for me. I ate, whatever I would experiment in my teens. In my 20s, like when I was in college, from 20 to 22, I got very sugar addicted. I was a workaholic at that time, and it's like, okay, there's the candy bowl that's on the counter at the house, and you're working on a project, and you walk by and you think, well, you know what? There's another assignment due. No need to make a meal. I'll take a snack. And that turned into a horrific addiction that lasted until about 2 years ago. Um, and I tried many, many things to deal with that. That was, I think, the primary issue for me was just that addiction. Because it got so bad that if I didn't have chocolate, I would feel like I was going to pass out, right? It felt like a dependency. Um, and also, of course, sugar meant happy in my brain, right? So there was the emotional dependency as well. But that was where I was coming from. Even though I was trying to, I was trying to eat balanced meals. I was trying to eat the standard, get my greens and whatever the typical stereotype of nutrition was, and I explored many different ones. Um, about 4 years ago, I was very involved in the acro yoga community and the yoga community. So had a lot of friends in that space. And, they lean very much in the direction of vegetarian, vegan, fruitarian. That's the popular world. So, I was hearing lots of those viewpoints. And so I started to, try those to experiment in that direction. I tried being a vegetarian. I tried being a vegan. I even tried being a fruitarian. That ended up being the worst. It was pretty bad. But around 3 years ago, it was at its worst, and it my main struggles that in hindsight I attribute to diet is I had massive depression, massive chronic fatigue, um, I hate even saying the word, but fibromyalgia. The reason why I hate saying the word is I feel like it's a word for it hurts. We don't know why. um, uh, but I had full body pain constantly, um, and I was getting sick about every week, which was it felt like death. It felt like I was just like on a trail to just falling apart. And it was getting consistently, predictably worse. And I heard, I actually looked it up to check, and it was the podcast about 2 years ago with Jordan Peterson on the Joe Rogan podcast. He mentioned his daughter. It was a little over 2 years, I think. Um, and I thought, that is stupid. I'll try it. Like, I want to be clear. Like, I came to this a skeptic. I came to this like having tried as many things as I could find, and then seeing this and going, well, this doesn't make any sense, but none of the other things really make any sense now either. I'll try it. And I started with her. She had a blog post that I just loved because it was so straightforward. It was before she had any notoriety here herself, and it was just this simple blog post that said, I felt bad here. This bad thing happened. This bad thing happened. I tried this, and this, and I cut out this, and then things were better. And I was like, I like that kind of information. So I tried that elimination diet, which was essentially like a pretty strict keto diet. And I started feeling better. And that's what got me started down the rabbit hole.
And to this day, are you pretty much free of all those issues you had before? Or are you pretty happy where you're at health wise?
So depression is gone. Um, Fatigue is like, I don't even know how to describe how much better it is. Like, I still think I could get higher energy levels, but it's so much better. It's astonishing. The chronic pain I still have, also, it's also way more slight. Like, before it was, the kind of thing that would keep you in bed. Now it's like, I don't like this, but I'm dealing with it. Also, I do a lot of cold exposure and breathing exercises. I find Wim Hof to be fascinating stuff, and I found that helped as well with the pain. Um, let's see what else. I haven't been sick. Um, uh, I might have been sick on keto, but since I went straight carnivore, which was about a year later, I kept narrowing down the diet and getting rid of more and more things. And finally, I just decided to go full on beef, salt, and water. And I did that for 14 months, minus like three tiny debacles. Like, the guacamole just looked so good one time. I was like, it can't hurt, right? It hurt. I tried a couple little things here and there, but I went beef, salt, and water essentially for 14 months minus like three things, and I have not been sick since then, which most of my life I've gotten sick pretty easily. Those 3 years ago, it was horrific. To not be sick, I do not know how to express how life changing that is. Oh, I didn't mention the most important part. So you came and found me because that video that I made, but then you started exploring and you got interested in the content that I make. I've known my entire life that my mind was my asset. I knew that it wasn't like, my boxing ability. It wasn't my running ability. Like, I knew that I had something that I could offer with my mind. And I had brain fog for, thinking back, it was probably about 10 years. And the way I would describe that is, it for somebody who knew that their mind was their strength, it felt like being a runner with an injured ankle. And but inexplicably so. And I would come to a problem that I knew that I should be able to think through, and I just couldn't do it. And I know that's a kind of vague explanation, but the experience itself was vague. It was a foggy experience where I would come to things and just be mentally sluggish. And I would not know what to do about it. And that more than anything felt like just being it felt like being stuck in a box, like just like just being trapped in some way. And that I like that is cleared up. I go for a walk in the morning and I think about what I want to think about, and I decide what I want to do and I go do it. And that sounds so simple, but to me it's everything. To be able to use my mind again has been the biggest thing.
Yeah, and one of the things which is kind of nice, if you watch your TikTok videos, it's kind of you look at you're always in profile as you're talking off into the distance. It's just got, I guess that's just a technique you decided to use, but you're within 30 seconds to a minute, you're able to provide a very nice uh, story or some sort of educational thing very clearly. I think it's very, very good. And I was going to ask you about the cognition part, but obviously you answered that part. And that's a thing that a lot of people will notice, is that they feel sharper mentally. Their mood is elevated. They just feel more productive in general. Let me ask, so just what made you decide to use TikTok and to use these 31 1 minute 30-second 1 minute vignettes, and how did that evolve?
Okay, so there's a couple of things. Um, I've like I said, I'm an artist, so I've been on social media for however long it's been around, exploring and making stuff of different types. Um, a friend of mine ran a business online, so he was very involved in social media as well. And he started telling me to get on TikTok. And at that point, I was pretty burnt out, and I was like, another social media platform? Do I have to? And but he kept getting on me to try it so much that I was like, okay, there's something of note here. I made an account at like 11 p.m. one night, and messaged him at 3 a.m. in the morning and went, "Oh no." It was like the most addictive thing I think I've ever seen in terms of, an app. It was just stunning to me, the creative expression on there. So as soon as I saw how impressive it was, I wanted to make something for it. And what I ended up making was just standard things that I'd made in the past of my art world. And it did just as badly as it had always done, because I had some hang-ups there in my creativity. And I take full responsibility for when something doesn't work. That wasn't working because I wasn't making the things I needed to make. But this ties in actually with the cognition. An interesting thing happened, and it ties in with the side profile. Is one day, just I ended up thinking about my creative process, and I realized that I was trying to do a lot of things that were hard for me. I'd known for years that I wanted to share my thoughts online, and occasionally I'd tried and I'd looked at the camera, and well, I stuttered and I had trouble remembering my words because I was scared. Because some people are scared when they look at the camera. It's sort of a stage fright type of a thing. And I thought about it, and just I thought, well, that's dumb. Why would I do something that's hard for me? I've started doing this in many parts of my life, by the way. And another thing was I would try to come up with something to say, and I couldn't remember it. Memory has always been a bit of an issue for me. I'm very good at remembering concepts, but I'm very bad at remembering structured things. So I can remember somebody's idea or an understanding of how something works much better than the average person. And I can remember like a structured number or date much worse than the average person. Um, and I would come up with something to say, and then I'd try to remember it and say it, and I would fail miserably at it. So I said, well, I'll just write out a script and I'll read it off like a zombie. Let's do that, because that's what I can do. So I started thinking with much more clarity about just what I was trying to do. And I started doing easier things. And the very first video that I did that way ended up taking off and going viral. Um, it was just a flip of perspective. And I mean, surely, you know, there's some luck and chance in there, and that's wonderful. I'm super grateful for it. But I'm definitely convinced that there was a change in my behavior that helped. So that was enough, you know, enthusiasm and excitement for me to continue doing it, and it's just been growing since then.
Yeah, and like I said, you're right about the TikTok stuff. I was encouraged to get on there by my girlfriend, and I reluctantly went on there, and I was just like, there's, it definitely has an addictive nature. You just sit there and, you see some really interesting stuff. And, I did one video, I got like 3 million views, which I was like, well, I've never had anything like that on any of my social media. So it definitely has this potential to generate a lot of stuff. And so you're kind of like, well, that's because I'm trying to get a message out there of health and this obviously counter to the mainstream messages. I'm sure you're aware, and it's challenging because you don't have the you're not going to, the New York Times is not going to run an article on how great an all meat diet is. They're just not going to do that. There's too many conflicts of interest to allow that to happen. In the video, I want to talk about that because the video you had made that got my attention was you were talking about. You think that investing in meat or beef in particular is a very wise idea, and you think, and can you, maybe you can elaborate on that, because like I said, it's you've got these 30-second, 45 seconds, but I'm sure you've got more that's behind the scenes. So let me ask you a little bit about that. Why do you think? I mean, everything we're seeing is we need to get rid of cows because they're farting and killing the planet, and everybody's going to have heart attacks and cancer because they eat meat, and it's a great thing to get rid of it. And we've got all this wonderful plant-based meat that just tastes and looks exactly like meat. And you're saying, hey, no, maybe you should invest in meat. Why do you say that?
Yeah, I'm quite convinced. So there's quite few things. So one, I really like investing. The more I learn about it, the more I'm fascinated by it. And a big part of why is I've noticed that investors seem to be very interested in finding out what is. Because they know if they have an opinion that's different from what is, they will lose money. And that creates a degree of realism in that field that I think is really cool. Not everybody, of course, but I think that a lot of investors are very eager to seek out what is true, and I think that's valuable to the world. With beef in particular, yeah, I have a couple of ideas of why this would be. Um, One, is because it's a luxury item, and that um, shouldn't be underestimated. And what I mean by a luxury item is it's it's the treat for a lot of people in the world. It's the thing that we eat on a special day. Um, and of course, you and I believe in moving towards something slightly different than that, where it might have a little bit more normalcy. But if it's a luxury item, then there's some inherent value specialness in its consumption. And the overall wealth of the world is building. And when wealth builds, luxury consumption goes up. So we look at it um, from the opinion side of, oh well, it's bad for the environment, we need to make it go away and be a responsible citizen and burn it all, or I don't know, whatever. um but if you just look at human behavior, we like treats, we like things that we like, And the more wealth there is in the world, the more capable we are of obtaining the things that we like. So from just a base level, we like beef. So I think that's a really good reason for it to grow, because we're becoming more and more capable of obtaining the particular things that we like. So that's my first basic idea behind it. Um, the next idea is, okay, let's look at just what happened to me. I'm healthier. I don't know any other way to say it, but plain and simple, I'm healthier. I went and got my blood tests, and they were, above average on every marker except for, like, they were like, oh, this particular cholesterol level was up a little bit. I went and Googled it, and so far, I mean, I'm sure you can, uh, you know, you could say more on this than I could, but what I could find was we don't actually know what that marker means. It was like, we've been using this as a warning that heart disease might be coming, but we don't actually know. That is that correct, by the way?
Well, I mean, my assumption is you're talking about LDL cholesterol, and there's certainly associational data, and there's some people that will very strongly suggest that elevated LDL cholesterol does indeed increase your risk of cardiovascular disease. But when we look at something that's more important, like all-cause mortality, am I going to die or not? The data out there doesn't suggest. It suggests that there's a very much a U-shaped curve, and the cholesterol for heart disease reduction is much lower than it would be for all-cause mortality, whether you're going to die of cancer or we're all going to die of something. And if you say, well, I don't want to die of heart disease, so therefore I'm going to lower my LDL cholesterol, but I don't mind if I die of cancer or neurodegenerative disease or infectious diseases,
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where, it's like whose decision is it on how I'm supposed to die? If I were to say, give me 3 ways to die: cancer, dementia, or a heart attack, I'm going to probably take a heart attack, quite honestly, if I had if I got a choice there. And so we've got people that want to say that perhaps cardiologists, because that's all they see, they're stamping out cardiovascular disease, and cardiovascular disease kills most people. But at the same time, you're like, there are many, many worse things. The other thing we don't know is that a lot of this data is collected on people eating kind of the standard American diet, and elevated LDL cholesterol in that population may be very different than elevated LDL cholesterol in a population of people that have lower triglycerides and lower inflammatory markers and better glycemic control and less obesity, and on and on and on and on. So I think your initial thesis is we really don't know what it means. I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think we can kind of say that in certain situations, in certain people, this is a good target to deal with, but does that apply to everybody equally? I don't think it does. And I think that the evidence also supports that, at least, much of the evidence. Now, there's people that have a certain bias and agenda that will completely ignore this stuff and tell you that, you look at it. You can look at it yourself. If I say, Josh, if you lowered your cholesterol and you went back to the level of health and happiness you had 4 years ago, would that make sense for you as a trade-off? And you probably say, hell no. Most people would. They'd rather prefer to feel good and function well. And I think that's something that we, unfortunately, as a medical profession, sort of discount. It's like, your labs don't meet my expectations, and therefore we're going to do everything we can to change that, put you on medications, change your lifestyle. And you may not want to do that.
I was a black belt when I was 18, and this year was the first year that I felt like maybe, I could take myself on. And I'm 31 now. And it's like, you should be able to take your 18-year-old self on until at least you're 40. At least, bare minimum, I think. Like, you have, so much more knowledge, experience, etc. But it was just a steady downhill from there. And I don't feel that way anymore. And that's incredible.
Yeah. And probably your LDL cholesterol was quote unquote better back then during the steady downhill, and so that's the thing that I think we get lost at. But Let me ask you, because you do a lot of like obviously introspective type stuff, and you think about how do I improve, and you talk about sometimes it's as simple as just one process, and then you build upon that. So let's talk a little bit about that, because there's a lot of people that are out there, particularly we see it more and more, unfortunately, as the overall population health, both physical and mental health, has declined significantly. We see more and more people that are dealing with anxiety and depression, and just general, just don't feel very good. What are some of the strategies that you've used to, like you can use your own experience. How did you, like I said, it was dietary, but you started some habits that allow you to build upon that. So you have foundations. So talk a little about some of this foundational stuff.
I really want to talk about that. Do you mind if I let myself get sidetracked. Do you mind if I add a couple of the last things about the investing?
I will let you to talk about anything you want to talk about, Josh. Go ahead, whatever you want to
Okay,
talk about.
I'll just add a couple others because I do think it's very exciting. The concept of what could happen in the food industry and beef specifically. So another is I think it was a talk I saw of Kimball Musk putting up a PowerPoint that showed a photograph of the largest landowners in the US. And they were all a bunch of elderly folks at Piccadilly's. And he's like, no matter what, we're having a shift coming, right? These folks are going, checking out eventually somehow, some way. And those people owned the majority of land in the US, therefore, the majority of the food production. So we're coming to a point of transition, not just because of people getting frustrated, information flows changing, all these other things, but also simply because of like generational behavior, where land is about to get either passed down or broken up and sold. And that is going to result in different techniques as a new generation takes over. So that's another thing. And those people are going to try to go towards the most profitable behaviors. Um, and sustainable beef production is I don't know that beef is more popular than ever, but there is now a much stronger desire for positive cultivation in the beef industry. So I believe there's a good bit of things that are going to happen there. Another thing is, uh, and I don't know how you feel about this, but lab grown meat. Um, I personally think that there's a point at which that could be a viable thing where it's actually no different because you can take a muscle and you can grow it in a lab, so far as I can tell. And right now that is horrifically expensive and uses a lot of energy. And energy is once again like one of the big complaints, right, about the meat industry. But there's some odd things that are happening in the industry right now. One of them, actually, around Bitcoin mining, is we're having a massive need for more energy, but the need for more energy is happening on a more diverse front. So, what I mean by that is we now have a use for uh, geothermal generators in the volcanoes of El Salvador. We can do Bitcoin mining there. Um, we now have a use for remote dams and rivers that don't have a town nearby, and because you can't transport electricity past a certain distance, and the result of this is actually a more balanced energy grid that's more sustainable. And we also are going less and less towards the non-sustainable energy generation, which means that our access to energy is going to absurdly increase in the coming years. And the use of energy is actually going to become, I think, less of an issue. We still have to protect the environment. We still have to do, all of the positive good things that people that are, against energy usage say. We do need to do those things. But the energy usage itself, I believe, will become less and less of a factor in these positive maintenance, ecosystem friendly things that we need to do. And so that energy will be able to be utilized in the process of making more effective labs. We will have innovation in that industry, and it will trend towards becoming as easy as growing basil in your garden. I really think that lab grown meat is going to trend towards the easiest thing ever. So that's my combination of thoughts on why beef has a strong future.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, I've talked to, I don't know if you're familiar with Marty Bent, he's one of the guys in the Bitcoin space, and he's talking about, or some people are talking about Bitcoin energy utilization will drive innovation with regard to how to harvest energy in a sustainable way, because the need will be there and they'll solve that. Now, the concern I have around lab grown meat, I have no doubt about it. It'll get on the market. It'll be on the market. And in fact, it's already on the market in Singapore. You've got lab grown chicken thing that's just already been approved and served in a restaurant. So it's definitely coming. How much of it will supplant traditional beef? Will they coexist alongside each other? The concerns I have around lab grown meat is, one of the things is there will be a desire to adjust it to a preconceived notion. That is to be that they will grow lab grown meat. The muscle part, you're right, they can make very easy, but the fat becomes a bit of a challenge, because then they have to decide how they're going to do the fat. There's companies out there that are growing or they're making new fats that have never existed before. They're using different like carbon chains to make different saturated and polyunsaturated fats. So they'll change the fat content of the meat. Is that a net positive? Is that a net negative? Some of the other things that are in meat that aren't just muscle tissue, connective tissue, nervous system, lymphatic tissue, is difficult to put in there. How much benefit they provide for us, we don't know. The other concern is that these cells that they will grow in a lab will become basically kind of similar to what we call immortal cell lines, where they just continue to replicate, and they start to mutate over time. And so we've got, like, for instance, we've got cancer cells that have been growing since the 1960s. Breast cancer cells have been growing in labs, and they use them over and over to experiment on them. And that's likely what they may tend to do. The other thing is, and you mentioned the energy part. Right now, this is a very energy intensive process. It's less efficient from a fossil fuels standpoint than actual cows in a field. Cows are solar powered. They eat grass, they drink water that falls from the sky. They're actually, when it comes to putting out nutrition, not just calories, but actual nutrients, they're actually pretty efficient relative to other ways we raise it. And so the other concern is that lab grown meat does not help rebuild soil, where cows are rebuilding soil. We can't grow food without soil, because the lab grown meat you have to feed. Remember, you can't just, there's not a protein fairy that just flies around and gives these cells protein. You have to feed those cells continuously protein. So where does the protein come from? It comes from soybeans and peas. And so you still have to grow all these crops to do it. And so, however, I don't disagree. It will be on the market. It will be scalable. It will be, it will take, it will be, somebody's going to make a lot of money on that. That's, as you know, if there's money to be made, people are going to want to make money, and they're going to market it in a way to do that. So I'm not very particularly bullish on that for a health standards. I don't think it'll be, I think there may be some negatives from a health standpoint. We won't know for 30 or 40 years, quite honestly, because, you won't have, and you may not ever be able to tell, because it's very challenging to tell what foods do to what, unless you just sit there and, and you may be able to do your own personal experiments. You say, hey, when I started eating lab grown meat, I just didn't feel as good versus the real stuff. And that may be all we get to, that may be the only way to discern this stuff. And of course, what I will see is you will see all kinds of studies within the next 5 to 10 years saying how great animal protein is, because we have this market that's been created. They want to sell it, and they'll sell it through studies. And there'll be studies saying, oh, well, animal protein really wasn't bad. It was a saturated fat, and we fixed that problem. We'll see that as a marketing strategy. So, but you're right. There will be a lot of investment. There will be a lot of money made in that. I mean, my preference is to kind of continue the animals, but raise them in a very environmentally friendly way, which we can do, and we do. But anyway, all right. Let's talk a little bit about maybe the foundational stuff, or if you want to, what else,
Absolutely.
or anything you want to delve
I'd love
into.
to. I'd love to. And yes, I am with you on those concerns. The way I think of it is I'm concerned that they'll make lab grown beef like they made corn, right? You know, it's like they turn corn into the perfect dispensary of, you know, carbs and sugars, you know, it's like all it does. And yeah, I'm as well concerned about that. And to tie in what I said about Bitcoin at the beginning with this, um, the thing I said at the beginning was Bitcoin provides certainty, and the certainty comes from the way it's constructed, just the actual software and how the rules of how everything's operates. And then the other element is this energy element. And when those two things combined, where you have certainty, which another word for it you could use is stability, and when you have stability and extra energy, you're able to innovate, you're able to create, you're able to make new things. So that is kind of a way of like hopefully tying together these two ideas to say why I would think that cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin in particular, are going to kick off just a massive uh, new trend of innovation, into the simpler things of the daily habits and things like that. Is yeah, when I had my crash, when I was at my worst health wise and mental health wise, about 3 years ago, there were a couple things in particular that I took on, and one was a way of thinking around, let's call them dreams. And the idea here is I was always a dreamer. I always wanted to create something big. I always wanted to, you know, become a rock star, become a giant business, whatever it was. You know, like I wanted to do something amazing, and that's great. And if you want to do that, you should. But if you want to do that and you're comparing your desire to where you are in life, and it makes you sad and incapable, it's a problem. And I realized that that's what I was doing. I was comparing what I wanted to be to who I was, and it wasn't pushing me to improve myself. It was making me miserable. So a weird thing that it sounds really counter to any motivational speech or any typical self-help thing is I essentially gave up. And what I mean by that is I gave up strategically. I gave up in the way where I said, okay, if these things, just statistically speaking, may never happen to me, these amazing things that I want to achieve. If I live my life the way I'm living it right now, that means I will live in hell for the rest of my life. I don't have a good life. And that was completely untenable. It was not something I could stand. So that was my way of sort of manufacturing a rock bottom where I said, okay, there's no way I can keep living this way if these dreams that I have never work out. Because the stereotypical behavior of an artist is to go, oh, I'll pay that bill when I make it big. Oh, that thing, that relationship, I'll fix it when I get my big, my big break, and that has destroyed so many people. And what I did was I sort of gave up on that concept of the big break. And that enabled me to feel pride when I put an extra $10 on my student loans. Like when I took on, 2 extra hours of working in the week. In the past, doing that would make me feel bad because the effort required to do it and the result were so small. That effort was so big and the result was so small, and I would compare them to my vision of what the great, magical person that I wanted to be, that it would feel like a failure to take on more hours. It would feel like a failure to, pay a small amount extra onto my student loans. but switching that enabled me to feel like I had accomplished something. Basically, I looked at who I was and I saw that this person was a little bit better, even though it was tiny. And that was one of the major things that got me started moving in a positive direction. And then from there, I started asking myself, what are the smallest habits I could take on that would make my life better? Like really small stuff. And one of the things that I did was I found the Wim Hof method, which was breathing in cold exposure. And it's so simple and so utterly low budget that, you know, it was a great thing for me to start exploring. So I started just doing basic breathing exercises regularly. I started going for walks regularly. Walks are like a religion for me now. And I'm more and more stunned by how effective a simple walk is, particularly if you're a person that needs to think. And I mean, you know, Beethoven went for walks. Steve Jobs went for walks. Uh, um, many philosophers like daily walks were just a part of their life. Jack Dorsey, the founder of Twitter and Square, you know, walks regularly. Like so many really high performing, high achieving people do this simple thing, and I made it into a fixed point in my life. I'm a very creative, open individual that gets very scattered. I like to change topics. I like to bounce. And so I knew that I couldn't create some massive structure that I felt pinned in by. But I thought, okay, if I can create small, tiny things that I can hang on to as fixed points of stability in my life, then I can build out from there. So I started breathing, I started walking. I wasn't even working out because at that point my physical health was so bad. I just, it felt like damaging myself. It felt, I just couldn't do it. And maybe I should have, but I couldn't give myself at the time to do it. Um, and then I started paying a little bit extra on my debt, right? Student debt. And it wasn't like, oh, you need to pay this much extra. It was like you have to do more than what you're supposed to. Like $10 more, whatever. Um, and then I started doing the diet. And once I realized that that worked, I it became another fixed point where it's like this is a non-negotiable. And that non-negotiable allowed me to get off what I don't know if it was what felt like a physical dependency on sugar. And I could feel my body shift as I was on this different diet. And I realized that, like, you know, I wasn't going to be sick if I didn't eat it. And once I had that realization, then I could deal with the emotional component of like, I have a bad day and I have a craving. And like, I could recognize the craving for what it was at that point. And those were the primary fixed points right there. Were those couple of things. Oh, last one. I found a friend, and it was a friend that was a consistent person, and he was encouraging around finances and encouraging around me trying to improve my life. And I thought to myself, I mean, you know, you hear it a million times. You're the average of the five people you know. I thought to myself, this is important. And I've barely missed a meal every week since I decided to do that. And I was like, we have dinner once a week, like we've done that for like 3 years. And like every time we would talk at the beginning, he'd be like, "Oh yeah, you could pay off that debt. Oh yeah, I know you're struggling there, but you could do this extra thing here to make life better." And those combinations of things, as tiny and humble and as simple as they are, I would say those are the primary things that changed my life.
Yes, and that's very interesting stuff. Josh, where do you think? I mean, if you look forward, I mean, you may have a plan in place, but where do you plan to go? What do you plan to do over the next, short term, 3 to 5 years? I mean, obviously, you're going to still continue with the social media stuff, but what is the goal at this point?
Yeah, so I really do like creating. So like you said, social media, I do want to continue exploring there and offering things. Um, I've written the first draft of a book. I intend to publish that. Um, and I have several more ideas for other books. So I would really like to write. And you know, if people enjoy my books, I just think that would be an incredibly rewarding direction in life to you know, create some material that, you know, people find of value. Um, the podcast I think is really important in a lot of ways. As as I've bounced to several times, I creative and I like to change topics, and I feel like podcasts will allow me to do that a little bit. It'll give me some variety. So I'm really excited to explore ideas. I love it. Just diving into concepts with people. Um, I want to continue pursuing investing, potentially, you know, in a big way in the future, where you know, when you get to a certain point with investing, you can make changes, right? Because where you put resources, you know, there's a little bit more energy there, and I would love to get to that point. I'm not there yet, but I would like to be able to vote with my dollars that way, to you know, say, hey, I think this is of note, and we should put our energy and attention there to improve the world in this way. And then lastly, I'm still fascinated by learning theory and just the concepts required to learn. I feel like there should be a class at every grade level in school that is not about a particular subject, but how to learn subjects. I think that understanding that learning itself is a skill is of critical importance, maybe today more than ever. And I'd love to continue spreading that message and finding ways to help people learn that.
Josh, this has been truly informative, and thank you so much. Can you let folks know where, you know, if they want to follow you, I guess on Instagram. Well, I guess you have an Instagram as well, but I think where's your social media? Tell us, you know, maybe the name of your book, when it's going to be out, that stuff, for people who want to get more information about you.
Yeah. For social media handles, I'm Josh Terry Plays. Wherever you might want to find me: LinkedIn, TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. You can find me Josh Terry Plays at all those places, and then you can search Josh Terry Plays, but with spaces, in any podcast platform to find me there. And I do not have a title for a book yet. It is about learning theory, and it is about it's a way of communicating um, this concept of learning to do simple things in order to learn. So it's learning how to hone in on small things in a way that, like, you can maintain it, to utilize that to increase your learning speed and ability.